Hey, it's Grant, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a 100% whole wheat sourdough bread. That's right, 100% whole grain wheat flour will be used in this recipe. It is possible to make whole grain bread that tastes good. It's delicious, soft, and fluffy. I actually ate all this bread, so I would show it to you right now, but it's gone. So here's how to make it. To get going with this recipe, you'll need to feed your sourdough starter about 4 or 5 hours before you're ready to make your bread. So I'm taking 10 grams of sourdough starter out of the fridge, which is where I keep it, and I'm feeding 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water to the mixture, and then I'll have about 100 grams of starter ready to use. So put the water in first and then give it a good mix. Then mix in the 50 grams of flour and stir that all together. Four or 5 hours later, your starter should have risen to about double in size. Now it's time to mix the ingredients. I'm not doing an auto-lyse in this recipe, I'm just mixing all of the ingredients together all at once. You'd be surprised how well this works. Just keeping it simple, keeping it easy. So I'm adding 100 grams of sourdough starter to 350 grams of water. I'm going to give that a quick stir just to mix everything together. Then add 10 grams of salt, and 450 grams of whole grain wheat flour. Once it's all in the bowl, mix everything together with your bowl scraper until there aren't any dry bits of flour left. And after about a minute of mixing, it should look something like this. This dough actually has a lot of water in it, 350 grams, that's an 80% hydration dough. But even though it's got a lot of water, the whole grains tend to soak up a lot of water, they're pretty thirsty. So this dough really holds together pretty well. After mixing, all you need to do is cover up the dough with a kitchen towel or a linen like this one, and let it rest for about 30 minutes. Hey, you like this angle? Nope. Okay, next week I'm going to be making a different type of sourdough bread out of a whole grain flour, but it's a different flour. It's one you might not have used before. So stay tuned to the end of this video and I'll let you know which flour I'll be using next week. 30 minutes later, it's time to perform the first stretch and fold on the dough. You're just going to grab an edge of the dough, pull it up and over the dough. Then grab the next edge, pull it up and over. Keep going around the bowl till you go around the dough once, then cover it up and let it rest for another 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, do another set of stretch and folds on the dough. Then cover the dough up and let it rest for 30 more minutes. Then 30 minutes later, perform the last set of stretch and folds. You'll notice the dough is a lot smoother and easier to handle at this point. When I'm done with all the stretch and folds, I sometimes like to move my dough to an oiled bowl where it can finish bulk fermentation. This step is optional though. Once the dough is in the bowl, I like to stitch it up with a few more stretch and folds. Once your dough is nice and snug, put the lid on the bowl and move the dough to a warm spot in your house where it can finish bulk fermenting for 4.5 hours or until about doubled in size. After bulk fermentation, your dough should look something like this. Now it's time to pre-shape this dough into a ball. Go ahead and sprinkle your counter with a little bit of flour, and then do some stretch and folds on the dough just to get it to release from the sides of the bowl. Then carefully take the dough out of the bowl and place it onto the counter with the seam side facing up. Then all you need to do to pre-shape this dough into a ball is to keep stretching and folding the dough on the counter to form a nice tight ball of dough. Earlier I did a different video about how to shape a sourdough boule. This is the same thing as that. Check that video out if you want to. Then flip the dough over onto a clean part of your counter so the seam side should be down and the smooth side should be on top. And cup and pull the dough with your hands a little bit just to smooth out the edges of the dough. This cupping and pulling process creates tension across the top of the dough, which is exactly what you want. You can do the same thing with a bench scraper if you want to, but you don't have to, you can just use your hands. Then cover the dough up again and let it bench rest for 30 minutes before we give it its final shape. While your dough is resting, get your Banneton basket that you're going to be proofing your dough in. I'm using an oval one today. This is actually a new one that I got. I'll include a link in the description where you can get your own Banneton basket if you need one. Then dust your Banneton with a little bit of rice flour or whole wheat flour so your dough doesn't stick to the basket when you put it in. Once your dough has rested for 30 minutes, it's time to give it its final shape. Since my Banneton basket is oval shaped, I'm going to be shaping my bread into an oval or a batard. This is how I do that. Sprinkle the top of the dough with a little bit of rice flour. Flip it over. Fold the left third of the dough over the middle third. And then fold the right third of the dough over the middle third and crease the seam so it closes. And then starting at the end, tuck and roll the dough over itself, creating a long cylinder-shaped loaf. This is sometimes called the tension roll because you're also creating tension across the top of the loaf. This is something I like to do. I like to pull the flap of dough at the end and pull it under the dough. This just kind of rounds out each end of the dough and creates a little bit more tension on the top of the loaf. I like to sprinkle on a little bit more flour and rub it into the outside of the loaf just to give it a bit more of a non-stick surface. And then I'll carefully flip the loaf over and transfer it into the Banneton basket so the seam side is up and the smooth side is down. Then transfer the loaf just like this into your fridge where it can proof overnight in a cold environment and you can bake it the following day. The next day, when you're ready to bake, preheat your oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit with the Dutch oven inside. Then take the dough out of the fridge and flip it out of its Banneton basket onto a sheet of parchment paper. Then I just kind of rub this excess flour into the surface of the dough. Now it's time to score the dough. You can use any kind of razor blade or sharp knife that you want, but I'm using a razor blade in my curved dough lame. Just score one long slash from end to end in the dough just like this. I made another video about how to get an ear on sourdough bread. Check that video out in the link in the description and up top. It's really helpful for this scoring method. Then transfer the dough carefully, parchment paper and all, into the hot Dutch oven. Then close the Dutch oven lid and bake this at 500 degrees Fahrenheit for about 20 minutes with the lid on. 20 minutes later, remove the lid from the Dutch oven and check out your oven spring. For being a 100% whole grain bread, I am really happy with this oven spring. The bread definitely puffed up a lot in the oven. Shimmy this back into the hot oven and continue baking for another 15 to 20 minutes. with the lid off this time. 15 minutes later, my bread is hot, super crackly, and smells delicious. And after your bread cools down, it should look something like this. I used to think it was impossible to make 100% whole wheat sourdough bread that was light and airy and fluffy instead of dense and gummy. But it's definitely possible. Definitely possible. This bread is crusty on the outside, but still light and fluffy and airy on the inside. And even though it's light and airy, it doesn't have those big holes that a lot of sourdough bread has, which means it can hold up to a lot of butter and other toppings, and nothing will fall through the cracks. Here's a toasted piece of this whole wheat sourdough bread. Delicious. Stay tuned next week for when I'll be making another 100% whole grain sourdough bread out of